The Democrats in New Hampshire, too close to call. The Republicans, too early to call. After as frenetic a 5 days as an American primary has ever seen, the polls are closing at this hour in New Hampshire. The data from precincts, which closed earlier, combined with exit polling, is far from clear. NBC News can characterize the Democrats as Obama and Clinton in a tight race, which is too close to call. Among the Republicans, McCain has a lead over Romney, but it is too early to make a projection in that race. So it is not over, as we start to quote Yogi Berra. Good evening from our headquarters in New York. This is MSNBC's continuing coverage of the New Hampshire primaries. I'm Keith Olbermann alongside Chris Matthews, and we don't have any answers yet. We have these hard numbers. Let's run through these first. It's too close to call, as these numbers would suggest. The fact that this is not over as the polls close, Chris, 38, 36%, no projection, no winner in the Democratic race, is that by itself a foothold for Hillary Clinton?
Well, it depends. I mean, if she ends up losing by 4 or 5 points, as someone said not long ago, that's still a big problem. Charlie Cook made that observation. I mean, what is winning, what is losing? I think we're in the terrain where it means what it says. If you lose, you lose. She will have lost 2 in a row. It's hard to call anything a moral victory. We all know the Clintons. When Bill Clinton lost New Hampshire back in '92 by 8 points, having been ahead by 20, he declared himself the victor, the comeback kid, and a docile press corps went along with it.
Well, perhaps we're less docile this time. I think
this country's grown up quite a bit in those years.
At 11%, let's see what the Republicans look like, the hard numbers so far, and this is much closer to the expectation, but again, the advisory from our decision desk is it's too early to suggest this is going to hold up. It's McCain by 9 points with about 12,000 votes between himself and Mr. Romney, and 10% of the Republican primary reporting so far. So those are the hard numbers. Let's bring in NBC's Tim Russert and Tom Brokaw. Tom with us in New York and Tim in New Hampshire. Interpret, if you will, Tim, for us the idea that unlike last week at the close of activity, we had a projection in the Democratic race. We don't have one tonight.
We sure don't. We were very anxious, obviously, to see this raw vote and how it compares with the exit interviews we've been doing and the accuracy of the exit interviews. You know, Keith, you talk about the expectations game. Right after Iowa, several Clinton advisors said to me, if we can keep it within 5 points, it'll be very good for us. Then they said yesterday, if we can keep it in single digits, it'll be good for us. So everybody's going to work very hard on spin. And I think Chris is correct in saying, let's see what the vote is. Let's see who wins it by how much. The one thing I'd like to talk about for 1 second is what we talked about in Iowa. And that is, we can't overcomplicate this. What we're seeing here in New Hampshire is a huge amount of independents playing on the Democratic side, and also those numbers that in our exit poll about the anger and frustration with people going in the Democratic booth. 50% say they're angry, dissatisfied with the president, 93% on the Democratic side. When you take Iowa and New Hampshire, 2 swing states, that's a very significant statement of the level of anxiety and anger at Washington that we have found in back-to-back states. Obviously, that's not as important as who wins or loses tonight, but it is significant and I think worthy of note.
Tom, it seems to me that New Hampshire has been a pretty good state for the Clintons. I always thought, looking at it, the president's been successful up there in general elections, and that he won there obviously handily in '96, that he could come back up there and really help his spouse do well. I thought that for months, but we'll see what happens tonight. If that's still the case, if he still has that selling power that I always thought many people thought he had up here.
Well, but everything is so compressed now, Chris. You remember that the difference between Iowa and New Hampshire in the past has been at least 2 weeks. We're down to 5 days. And it was just earlier today on this channel and a lot of other channels that people were kind of mocking what President Clinton had to say on behalf of his wife. And there were lots of projections that this is going to be a big surge for Barack Obama. That was the perception going into tonight for a lot of the people who were just tuning into politics. So if she does come close tonight, within that 3 to 4 or 5 point margin, my guess is that tomorrow we'll hear them both saying, we are the comeback kids, and they'll portray themselves, and I talk about them as a team, as a kind of an insurgency. I think the other numbers that we have to pay attention to, of course, is why people voted for her or for Barack Obama, and what the general universe in the Democratic Party feels about who can win in the fall. That's something that she's not been able to move in terms of a number. There still are very high unfavorables for Hillary Clinton, and how that will play out in the weeks to come, especially on Tsunami Tuesday, could be very telling.
Tim, tonight, if it is close, around 10 o'clock, 2 hours from now, we know the Clinton track record is to call a press conference, or rather to call a rally, assemble the meal tickets, anyone they can find, and get into a small room, create a lot of rah-rah, and the semblance of a victory party. Is that a big part of tonight's call? Not just the numbers, but the ability of one or the other candidates to simulate victory?
Absolutely. I mean, presidential campaigns have a huge psychological component. And right now, the Clinton campaign needs any bit of good news. They were beaten soundly in Iowa, and they know that. They were calling people all weekend trying to raise money. They need to be able to reassure their supporters and their donors that their campaign is alive and well and going to fight in future states. And obviously a close outcome in New Hampshire would add to that, and they would boast about it tonight. You know, it's interesting in terms of the events leading up to tonight, the campaign tracks showed Obama ahead, all the campaigns who were polling. Think of the events yesterday. We had Senator Clinton getting a bit emotional, and yet finishing her comments, trying to distinguish herself from Obama. We had Bill Clinton making the impassioned plea that Obama should be vetted and tested much more than he was. Did that last-minute appeal from both Clintons have an impact on the voters? We'll know that in about 2 hours.
But Tom, there's almost whiplash going on here. If Barack Obama and the tidal wave, or as he described it, just the wave, title has been added by others, if that does not produce a large margin, is it all of a sudden, after last week's dramatic, historic moment, is this suddenly a disappointment for Barack Obama? Is the cycle that fast that your triumph out of nowhere, your triumph over the history of American politics, lasts 5 days?
Well, I have felt for some time, and I think I've said it on this broadcast before, Keith, that we all ought to take a deep breath, and that I think that the country deserves to get in on this dialogue about who we want our presidential nominees to be and what are the issues that are important to them. We've had a pretty good test in Iowa and New Hampshire so far, 2 northern latitude states, mostly white, no urban issues before them. We've had some very tough economic news today. AT&T reporting that they're going to have a significant downfall because of unpaid telephone bills. The Secretary of the Treasury, Hank Paulson, talking about a second wave of foreclosures coming. Countrywide, the most widely held of the mortgage companies, taking a real shot today in its stock prices, and that dropped the market, as you know, almost 2% today. So there are lots of issues out there that folks want to look at these candidates and see what they have to say about them. And frankly, I think that the process should be able to serve Americans beyond New Hampshire and Iowa. Now, there's no question about it. If you get a blowout in those first 2 states, you do get a lot of momentum. But maybe this will be a chance for this campaign to move on both on the Republican side and on the Democratic side, and I don't think that that's bad for the country at all.
Especially with those news stories, as you mentioned, Tom, concurring with the exit polls from both parties saying the economy, the #1 issue for Republicans and Democrats who went into those booths in New Hampshire today. Tim Russert, great thanks. Tom Brokaw, great thanks. We'll get back to you presently.